Alright, so today I've got this cylinder here out of a Timberjack skidder. It's a turn cylinder out of a 360. Older machine from the 70s, but I've got the transmission outside, so I'll try to do a video on that. I've got to rebuild the transmission, and it's getting a new motor, so we'll see how much I can film with that. It's been not in the best spot to film. But while the transmission's out, might as well do the steering cylinder. They're usually hard to get to, but right now, with the engine and transmission out, there's nothing in the way. I just pulled this out quick. So we're gonna pull this baby apart and reseal it. So first things first, let me get you a good shot. This cylinder goes together with a snap ring. There's a few different types of cylinders. I'll try to get some videos of the other types as well. So in this one, you've got a front plate here, which I took the bolts out. It has 4 bolts that holds this plate. We'll wiggle the plate back. Usually just with a whack with a chisel. All that has in it, it's got a wiper in it, and that just keeps junk from getting pulled back into the cylinder when it retracts. So you take that back, and you can see here, there is another plate. This is actually the gland. Now the gland is held in by a snap ring. It's a little bit further in. So to get these apart, what you do is you drive the gland in, pop the snap ring out, and then you pull the whole thing out. So for these, I'm going to drive the gland in. Try not to hit your rod. You can ding it up pretty bad. This rod's not in the best shape. And normally when it's got some nicks, it'd be good to replace it. We'll look at that after it's apart when it's easier to see. So you can drive this in. So there's a snap ring. Goes right around the inside. End of it's over here. So we'll get the snap ring out and then we'll pull the gland out. These are actually hose picks, but they're a little bigger, sometimes work pretty well on this stuff. There we go. Out she comes. So it's a pretty big snap ring. But that's what holds the cylinder together. And the way it works, this plate on the outside sits on the end of the cylinder and pulls the gland outwards and tight. And this snap ring groove in here, snap ring gets stuck in the end of the cylinder, can't come out. So the gland is pulling on the snap ring and it's being pulled by the end plate. But when you push the gland back, then you have space to take the snap ring out. So now that that's out, we'll try to get this gland out of here. We'll do that by pulling on these bolts a little bit. Sometimes you can slam the rod back out too. That works decently. I don't think this is super stuck though. It felt halfway okay when I drove it in. But we'll see. Sometimes they fight you, sometimes they come out real easy. Hopefully it's an easy one. Hopefully the oil's all drained out. I tried, but sometimes there's more than you think in there. I've got a barrel underneath the catch. Moment of truth on the oil. Hitting the next peg. Got some pegs on the edge of my bench here it's sitting on, which lets me take it apart without pouring the oil on the bench. I can put a tray under it. So, as you can see, there's a little oil coming out, but not too much. But that gland looks okay. It's dirty, but they always are. You're amazed how much junk gets piled in there over the years. I'd imagine this probably hasn't been out in 20 years. So with any cylinder, you've got your main parts. Maybe pretty basic, people have taken these apart, but if you haven't been in here before, you got your rod. It's got your eye on it. You've got your tube. You got a tube end with an eye, and you've got your gland. At the end of the rod, you got your piston. So when you put oil behind the piston, it pushes the piston and the rod out. When you put oil on top of your piston, but below your gland, it pushes your piston down and sucks your rod down. So you basically have a seal on your piston. It goes from the piston to the tube. There's often an O-ring between the piston and the rod so it doesn't leak through. And then you got your gland, which, like most of them, has an O-ring to seal the gland to the tube, and then there's going to be some seals inside, and there's a dust wiper to keep junk out. We'll get in to show you all that stuff here. We'll have to measure it all up first, and then I'll order seals, because this particular machine is old enough and it's kind of obscure. It's not in the book, so if they're pretty standard, I can find a listing and order parts by number, but when they're like this one, just have to measure it, then order. Luckily, being YouTube, you don't have to wait for it. It'll be in, like they got here, amazingly fast. You don't want to put air behind it. Air pressure, you'll fire these across the shop. I've seen one go through a garage door before. Because air pressure, it's not like hydraulic pressure. If you put oil behind it, you can push them out, and when it pops, it'll go about an inch and fall to the floor. Then all the oil goes on the floor. Air pressure builds up, it compresses, and when it releases, it makes this into a cannon, and that'll fire that thing through whatever's in front of it. Hope you're not standing in the way, but it's just not a good idea to use air on these. A lot of people have, but it's a terrible idea. Very dangerous. There we go. And there's some oil behind it. It looks pretty dirty. Should be pretty clear, but it's not. And see, this cylinder has actually two sets of packings on it. These look like V-packs, which are old style of packing. They work pretty well, but they're pretty old school. Which I guess makes sense, it's an old enough machine. With the V-packs, you have a piston that's actually made in multiple pieces. As you can see, the end of the rod is threaded. There's a nut. This nut holds this piston. The piston is, well, that's the gland. The piston is everything down here. This piston is three-part. It's got this end, that's got a bunch of rubber V-packs. Rubber, and there's a plastic here, the lighter layers. And there's the centerpiece. There's another set of V-packs, and then there's the top cap. So 3 parts are the center and the 2 caps. And then you have 2 sets of seals between the metal. And we'll take this apart and you'll see what type of these V-packs are. With V-packs, you have 1 set aiming each direction. A lot of the newer cylinder seals, you just have 1 seal in here. All that. These are kind of neat. They were originally designed the way they are. You can tighten the nut up. It actually expands the seal and gives you a little better seal. The thing is, these days when you buy seals, you don't really put these back unless you're in a real pinch. If you are, you can tighten it up, but really, you should just put new seals in when you get there. So, let me get this put in the vise. We'll take the nut off and I'll show you the inside of it. Alright, so I got it in the vise here. We'll take the nut off. impact wrench does great on that usually. So with the nut off, let's see what we got. Piston, come apart in pieces. Alright, so the first section, got that end cap I was talking about. Then a base plate, which is flat on the back and V'd on the top, and then these V packs, which as you can see, they're sort of V profile. They stack up. There's a couple different materials, and there's a top cap, which has a V on the bottom, and flat on the top. So these stick on this piece. The center is just a disc. And when you compress this, they get wider and tighten up in the cylinder. Now with the V's all facing this way, these are sealing against liquid pushing this way. So these are for extending the cylinder. These others will be going the other way. And then there's also an O-ring right here. That fits under this cap. There's an O-ring groove cut. And that keeps oil from leaking through the middle. If you have oil leaking through the middle, it'll bleed back one way or the other because your oil inside isn't being kept to this chamber or this chamber. It's able to cross through. So like when you have a tractor where the bucket leaks down, it's usually a bad piston seal in there, unless it's in your valve body. But as far as the cylinder end goes, a leak in your piston seal or around the center will cause it to leak down. So you can see this is just a flat plate. And there's another set. There's the top, and then 1, 2. This one's pretty stuck in here. We'll use a pick. We're not going to reuse these. 3. Will come off the other one. They're pretty stuck together. 3, 4. I think 3 and 4 are coming off in one piece. And then you got the other end. So there's another set of V-pack. You want to be careful not to scratch any surfaces in here. Oil can leak through a scratch. So try to keep the pick flat to it and not gouge into it. As you can see, these are, these two are pretty mushed. Kind of peel them apart. But this one you can see the edge is jagged. That's pretty worn out. So I don't know if this one was leaking or not, but it's getting replaced. You order these in different thicknesses. So you can see these two are stacked the same thickness, but they've got different combinations, which is probably just because if you want to save a few dollars on these, when you order the V-packs, these ends, they're pretty much always good, unless they've been screwed up. Like these ends are fine. The price difference in ordering the V-pack, you go inside diameter, outside diameter, and the height of them. I can order one that's this high, very similar to the price of one that's this high. So if you have good end plates, you can order a tall one with the correct number of discs in it and split it in half. Use your old end caps and get 2 of them out, which is probably why they got mixed layers. But, and that doesn't really affect the quality of the job either. It's just a way you can save some money, or sometimes you can't get the exact height that's in there, but you can buy something either a little bit taller or find something that's closer. You can get 2 shorter ones and a real oddball and put them together to get what you actually need. This isn't particularly tight, but it's just stuck enough. A light tap. I don't want to ding it. I'm not going to hit it hard. There we go. See, there's another O-ring. Because the 2 ends of the piston are symmetrical. I'm sure they only have 1 part number. So this has 2 O-rings sealing this piston. You should use a soft hammer when you're working in here. So yeah, there's all the metal. That's what your piston looks like. And you see those two grooves here and here are where the V-packs all go. These are in pretty good shape, so those will just get cleaned up and resealed. Here's your gland. And that's not for me. You can see that's a chisel. I didn't use a chisel. I used a flat punch. You want to use a soft one if you can, like a brass. So this has an O-ring on the outside. And this right here, what left of it at least, that was an O-ring backup, which is a flat on one side and concave on the other piece of rubber that fits in to hold the O-ring in the groove. If the O-ring fails, often it's because the O-ring is rolling in the groove. When it twists, it can leak oil. So we'll put that aside. Always replace your O-rings. They're cheap. And I think quite as frustrating as having it leak, just even worse after you put it back together because the O-ring's bad. If you could feel the O-ring I just took out, it's not round anymore, it's an oval. And you can see these are V-packs inside here, which should look nice and smooth, and hopefully you can see they are pretty chewed up. Get these popped out. When using a pick, you want to put the pick into the seals so it doesn't hit the metal. I'm not reusing the seals anyway. It doesn't matter if you gouge them up. There's another V-pack. You can see it's got chunks missing from the lip. This was definitely leaking. I don't see any way V-packs could be this chewed up and not leak. This one's not as bad, but it's got a chunk out of it there. This is the back. This is a soft back. The others are plastic. This is the same sort of fiber reinforced material. You can see it's not even round. Get the glare off. Maybe you can see it. This one's not even round. You can see there's a big chunk missing over here. The metal itself looks pretty good though, so that's good. That means we don't have to do anything to that. Then this being a two-part gland, here's the other half of it. Scrape this junk off of here. Now this is a metal wiper. You can cut your fingers real easily if you're not careful on these. It's got a seam you probably can't see here. It's very thin brass. It's designed to scrape all the junk off of the cylinder rod as it comes in. These aren't always easy to come by anymore. We'll see what I find. I have in the past on some of these oddballs remachined it to take a really standard wiper. Depends on what the... We'll measure it up and see what the groove diameter is, if it's something standard or not. It probably is. You know, that's coming out in pieces. It's nice if you can get them out in one piece and see a little bit more about what you're looking for. If not, it's not the end of the world, because you never measure the seal itself. You always measure the hard parts. You see this head, everyone's down here before. Two pieces of brass. These are pretty worn out from the feel of it. Cones, they stack up. A piece of rubber here, which holds down over the top and presses in. These went in this groove, which is slightly undercut. And these, we'll see if I find something that fits this groove. Otherwise, we'll do a little machining and update it. Let's take a look at the rod, see what we have here. Chrome's all missing back here. This eye, supposed to, you can see the end of it, is threaded. Thread's on there. And it must have broken because someone welded it, so think we might be making a new rod. In a pinch, you can polish this up and put it back together, but I'd rather have it right. Rod's usually not all that expensive, and this particular cylinder, I still have to rebuild the transmission on this machine, so if I wait a week for material, it's not too bad. So we'll get back to this when I have some material and some seals.